Have you ever heard of a dog who waited in silence for someone who never came back, and then waited even longer for someone who hadn't been born yet? In this story, you'll meet a 6-year-old boy who listens to whispers in walls, a forgotten war dog with memories no one believes, and a family whose healing begins where most stories end. What would you do if your child claimed a dog was calling to him through brick and stone? Welcome to Shepherd Tales, where stories carry more than just fur and paw prints. They carry legacy. This isn't just a story. It's a quiet miracle. Stay with us till the end. The lesson may change how you see memory, love, and time itself. The basement was unusually quiet for a place that held so much noise. A single bulb swayed gently from the ceiling, its flickering light casting uneven shadows across the cracked concrete floor. A low hum came from the old furnace in the corner, but it wasn't that hum that held everyone's breath that night. Noah Reynolds, 6 years old and impossibly still, knelt on the cold floor in front of a wall that had just begun to give. Dust floated in the air like ash. Behind him, his mother, Caroline, stood frozen, one hand clutched at her mouth, the other still holding her phone where she'd been moments from dialing 911. Tom, her husband and Noah's stepfather, stared, disbelieving, the crowbar hanging loosely at his side. And in the corner, Dr. Harper, the local veterinarian, dropped to her knees as something inside the wall moved. They had all heard it. Finally, Noah reached out slowly, fingers trembling, and placed a small hand against the newly broken plaster. From within, a soft sound answered, a breath, barely there but undeniably alive. Then, a fragile black nose pushed through a narrow gap in the brickwork, followed by the outline of a muzzle covered in dirt, formatted with time. She waited. Noah whispered, tears catching in the light. She knew I would come. And she had waited. For days? Months? Years? The answer lay just behind the crumbling plaster. 21 days earlier, there had been nothing extraordinary about the Reynolds family. They were just another modern family starting over in an old house, one they'd gotten at a too-good-to-be-true price on the outskirts of Windham, Vermont. Caroline had fallen for the wraparound porch in the late autumn light that turned the hill behind the property into gold. Tom had liked the workshop out back. Noah, well, he didn't say much. He hadn't said much since his grandfather passed away the winter before. But he smiled when they pulled into the gravel driveway for the first time. He said quietly, "It smells like someone's been waiting." Caroline had paused at that. She chalked it up to imagination or grief, or both. Noah was always a sensitive child, more sensitive than most. He remembered small things no one else did. He cried during commercials with lost pets. He had once insisted they stop the car because a turtle was trying to cross the road. And sure enough, there it was, inching along the shoulder. But the house was old. It creaked, groaned, and sighed like a living thing. The realtor called it character. The inspector called it settling. But Noah had another word for it. Breathing, he told his mother on the second night. He was in bed, surrounded by stuffed animals, the dinosaur-themed blanket pulled up to his chin. Caroline was tucking him in when he looked toward the vent near the ceiling and asked, "Do houses have hearts?" "Not really," she said, brushing hair from his forehead. "Then what's behind the wall downstairs?" Caroline blinked. "Honey, there's nothing behind the wall. That's just where the furnace is." He shook his head. "Not that wall. The one under the stairs. I heard something." Tom dismissed it. Of course. These old houses talk. You just have to learn their language. But Noah wasn't talking about language. He was talking about a sound that didn't belong. Something softer, sadder. It didn't always happen at the same time. Sometimes it came late at night, like a sigh in the dark. Other times it came during the day, when no one else was home. It was the third night when he spoke to it. He crept downstairs after bedtime, wrapped in his blanket like a cloak. The basement was cold, colder than the rest of the house, and it smelled faintly of dust and old paper. He stood still in front of the far wall, the one that faced the hill outside. It had no doors, no vents, no seams, just a solid stretch of whitewashed brick. But something was behind it. He sat down, cross-legged on the cement, and placed his hand on the wall. "I heard you," he said softly. "It's okay." There was silence at first, and then A faint shuffle. Something brushing the inside of the wall, like nails against stone. Noah's eyes widened, but he didn't run. He leaned in. "I don't think you're a ghost," he whispered. "I think you're a dog." The next morning, Caroline found a bowl of water and 3 crackers missing from pantry. Noah denied it at first, but that night, he brought a whole sandwich down and laid it carefully at the base of the wall. "She's hungry," he told his mother, and scared, but she said her name is Clover. Caroline's face drained of color. "Clover?" she repeated. Noah nodded, serious as only a child can be. "She's not dead, just forgotten." That night, Caroline sat with Tom on the porch after Noah had gone to bed. The stars above them were bright, scattered like dust across the sky. "It was your dad's dog," Tom finally said after a long silence. "Edward had a dog named Clover, before he disappeared." Caroline looked down at her hands. "He used to talk to her like she was a person," Tom added. "Maybe he passed that on. Or maybe," she said, her voice low, "she's still waiting for him." And somewhere beneath them, in the cold silence of the basement wall, a dog no one could see stirred. Her breath was shallow, her bones weary. But she had heard something new, a child's voice. And that voice, unlike the others, hadn't forgotten. Noah started talking to the wall every night. At first, Caroline thought it was just his way of processing the move, or maybe still grieving his grandfather. It had only been 9 months since Edward disappeared. And for a 6-year-old, that kind of loss doesn't file itself away neatly. But when Noah began bringing his pillow and blanket down to the basement stairs, whispering into a blank stretch of brick, she started to worry. She listened once, quietly, from the top of the stairs. His voice was soft but steady, like he was having a real conversation. "I brought you something better than crackers," he whispered, unwrapping a small piece of ham from the fridge. "It's salty. I think you'll like it." He paused, pressing his ear to the wall, then nodded. "I know it's cold. I'll bring one of my blankets tomorrow. You don't have to be alone." Caroline backed away slowly, unsure whether to feel comforted or afraid. It wasn't that she believed there was actually someone or something inside the wall, but the conviction in Noah's voice, the tenderness, the certainty it didn't sound like fantasy. It sounded like memory. At school, things didn't go much better. Mrs. Hargrove, his first-grade teacher, called home that Friday. Her voice was gentle, but there was concern beneath it. "We had a bit of an incident during art class," she said. Caroline blinked. "What kind of incident?" "Noah drew something that unsettled the other kids and the assistant teacher." "Unsettled?" "He drew a wall," she said carefully, "and behind it, a dog, a big one. Trapped. He said its name was Clover, and that she doesn't bark anymore because she's tired of no one hearing her." Caroline sank into a kitchen chair. "He also said Clover was his grandpa's dog," Mrs. Hargrove added, "and that she remembers war. But not the kind with bombs," he said. "The kind inside people's heads." There was a pause. "I'm not trying to alarm you." He wasn't disruptive, just different, deep, and very specific. Caroline thanked her and hung up. She stared at the phone for a long time after. When Tom got home that evening, she relayed everything. The whispering in the basement, the food offerings, the drawing at school. He laughed at first. "He's got an imagination. You had one too, remember? That whole summer, you swore you had a friend in the chimney." "This isn't the same." Tom looked unconvinced. "He's not pretending," she said. "He believes it. Completely. And the name, Tom, Clover, that wasn't just some random choice." Tom grew quiet. "Your dad talked about that dog like she was part of him. When he came back from overseas, he said she kept him alive more than once." Caroline nodded. "And now she's back?" "He's 6, Care. Kids make connections in strange ways." Caroline didn't argue. But something about the way Noah looked at that wall, like he was listening for a heartbeat no one else could hear, it gnawed at her. The next morning, she found one of the guest blankets missing. It wasn't hard to guess where it had gone. Downstairs, she found Noah curled up on the concrete floor, his small form pressed against the bricks, the blanket tucked neatly between him and the wall. A paper plate sat nearby with a few scraps of leftover chicken. A sippy cup of water stood next to it. He looked up as she approached, wide-eyed but unafraid. "She didn't eat this time," he said quietly. "She's too tired." Caroline crouched down. "Noah, honey, I know this feels real, but sometimes when we miss someone, our minds create ways to hold on." He looked at her like she had just spoken a language he didn't understand. "I'm not making her up. I know you believe that." "I'm not," he said firmly, and louder than she expected. "She's in there. She cries sometimes, but only when no one else is around. She says she remembers Grandpa. She says he promised he'd come back, and maybe I'm supposed to be the one who does that now." Caroline swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Later that day, while Noah was at school, she went down to the basement herself. She placed her ear against the wall, half hoping she would hear nothing. At first, it was just silence, then the faint whir of the furnace kicking on. But beneath that, something else. A scratch. She pressed her ear harder, held her breath. There it was again, just one sound, a whisper of friction, like nails or claws moving against stone. She stepped back quickly, pulse pounding. Dust from the wall clung to her cheek. She wasn't sure if it had been real, or if her mind had filled in what her heart wanted to believe. That night, Noah didn't speak at dinner. He barely touched his food. After a long silence, he said softly, "She doesn't think you believe me. That makes her sad." Tom frowned. "Buddy, we've been over this." Noah stood up, fists clenched. "I don't care if no one believes me. I believe her, and that's enough." He left the table and went upstairs. The room was quiet for a long moment. "I think he means it," Caroline said finally. Tom exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "I know." And somewhere beneath their feet, in the hollow dark behind a wall that should have been solid, something stirred once more. Something that had waited long enough. Noah didn't bring up Clover at dinner anymore. He still went downstairs every night, though, blanket over his shoulders, carrying a flashlight and a peanut butter sandwich. Caroline had stopped trying to stop him. She watched him go in silence, then sat on the stairs afterward, just far enough to give him privacy, just close enough in case something happened. Tom stayed quiet about it too, though every so often she'd catch him glancing toward the basement door with a tight jaw. They were all waiting now. For what? No one quite knew. It was on a quiet Thursday morning when Caroline found herself back in the attic. She had come up looking for an old toolbox, hoping to fix a leaky faucet. Instead, she found something else, a dusty green footlocker she didn't remember seeing during the move. It sat behind an old rocking chair, almost hidden beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. The name stenciled across the lid was faded but still visible. Edward R. Reynolds. Her father's trunk. Caroline sat down slowly and opened it. Inside were rows of old photos, letters wrapped in twine, and dog tags nestled in a small tin box. There were medals she'd seen once as a child and never again. Beneath the keepsakes was a manila folder labeled in her father's handwriting. Clover K-9 service record. She blinked, heart suddenly pounding. Inside were documents, military certifications, training records, photos. In the black and white pictures, Clover looked much younger, lean and alert, with sharp ears and eyes that sparkled like polished obsidian. In one, she stood beside Edward in full uniform. His hand rested gently on her back, and he was smiling, something Caroline couldn't remember seeing much of in real life. She flipped to the final page. An evaluation sheet marked top classification, Emotional Support K-9, PTSD Field Unit. Caroline felt her throat tighten. The dog wasn't just a pet. She had been her father's partner, his shadow in war, and, it seemed, in peace too. Later that afternoon, unable to shake what she'd seen, Caroline walked 2 houses down and knocked on a screen door painted seafoam green. Mr. Franklin answered in his usual worn flannel shirt and jeans that sagged at the knees. He was in his late 70s, a Vietnam veteran with a limp in one leg and a hearing aid he rarely turned all the way up. "Well, I'll be," he said, smiling faintly. "Caroline Reynolds. Or are you a Harper now?" "Still Reynolds," she said. "Can I ask you something about my dad?" He stepped aside without question. "Course you can. Come on in." His house smelled like coffee and old wood. She sat on the vinyl couch as he settled into his recliner with a slow sigh, one hand already reaching for his pipe, though he never actually lit it anymore. "I found some of Dad's things in the attic," she began. Pictures of Clover. Records from when she was in service with him. Mr. Franklin nodded slowly. "I always knew they were close. But this," she hesitated. "Did you ever meet her?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, almost reluctantly, he nodded. "I met Clover once. Just once. It was 1994. Your dad came back from a VA appointment and stopped at the diner. Said he didn't want to go home yet. He had her with him. That dog never took her eyes off him the whole time we sat there. Not once. It was like she was listening to his thoughts." Caroline swallowed. "What happened to her? After he disappeared?" Franklin exhaled. "Nobody knows." "Did she die?" He looked at her, and for the first time, there was something uncomfortable in his eyes. "I thought she must have. But what?" He tapped the armrest absently. "Edward came by my place about a year before he vanished. Said he needed help sealing something off. Said it had to stay quiet. I thought he was talking about a storage locker or maybe an old keepsake box." "You helped him?" "Not really. He changed his mind halfway through. Said I shouldn't be involved. That it was his burden to carry." Caroline's hands gripped each other tightly in her lap. "Do you think Clover's still here?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Mr. Franklin looked at her for a long moment. "I think if she is, she's waiting for the only person who ever really understood her." Back at home, Caroline stood in front of the basement door for nearly 5 minutes before she opened it. She found Noah curled up under a blanket at the base of the far wall, Clover's sandwich plate empty. Her son looked up, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Did she talk to you?" she asked. Noah nodded. "She misses him. Grandpa." "Does she remember anything?" "She remembers everything." Caroline sat beside him slowly, pressing her back to the cold wall. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the furnace filling the space. "She used to wake him up before the nightmare started," she said aloud, surprising herself. "He never told me that, but I always wonder how he started sleeping again. She still does that." Noah said, "Only now she wakes me." Caroline turned to look at him. "I think she's scared, Mom. She's trying to be strong, but she's really tired." She's not the only one. They stayed there until the light from the small basement window faded completely, and somewhere behind the wall, something shifted. A sound not unlike a sigh, a soft exhale from the dark, as if someone or something knew it had finally been heard. Caroline started keeping a notebook by her bed. At first, it was just to track the things Noah said, half out of curiosity, half out of concern. She didn't want to forget the strange phrases he used or the details that seemed too vivid for a child his age. But as the days went on, the notebook became something else, a place for her own questions, a place to sort what she could explain from what she couldn't. On Saturday morning, she flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "He said Clover dreams through him." It had been 3:12 a.m. when Noah came into her room, barefoot and whispering. "She showed me another place," he said softly. "Not this house. Somewhere with blue floors and the smell of vinegar. She was cold there. It was metal all around. And she kept waiting for the door to open, but it never did." Caroline had sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Honey, that sounds like a memory. But it's not yours." "I know," he replied. "It's hers." He didn't speak with drama or fear. There was no performative edge in his voice. Just quiet certainty, the way someone talks about the sky being blue. He curled up beside her under the quilt and fell asleep within minutes. Caroline lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling. The dreams kept coming. Noah began waking up with tears dried on his cheeks, or with his hands clenched tightly into fists. One morning, he described a dream so clearly that Caroline felt her heart stutter. There were sandbags stacked up, and a man was yelling. Clover was barking, but not out of fear. She was warning him. She ran into the smoke to find someone. He paused. She didn't come back for a long time, and when she did, she was burned. Caroline stared at him. "Who told you that?" "No one," he said, "but I saw it. I felt the heat." When she mentioned it to Dr. Harper, the vet didn't laugh or dismiss her. Instead, the doctor leaned back in her chair and folded her hands thoughtfully. There have been documented cases of dogs exhibiting emotional memory, reactive behaviors to places, smells, even people, especially working dogs. Their sensory memory can be stronger than ours. But what about kids? Caroline asked. Kids picking up on it like that? Dr. Harper shrugged. I've treated animals for over 20 years. I've seen a dog who stopped walking for a month after his handler died. I've seen cats return to burned homes they once lived in. The bonds they form don't end with language. That's not really an answer. No, Dr. Harper said. It's not. Noah's connection with Clover deepened quietly. She still hadn't been seen, at least not completely. Only the faint outline through the crumbled bricks. Only the whimpers, the soft scratchings, the way Noah would press his hand to the wall and whisper, and something would whisper back. But the house had changed. There were fewer creaks at night. The furnace ran more steadily. And Caroline could swear that, sometimes, the air near the wall felt warmer, like someone was breathing on the other side. Noah started drawing again. He'd always loved coloring, but now his pictures carried a weight that unsettled his teacher. One drawing showed a soldier crouched in a trench, arms wrapped around a dog. The dog's fur was matted, and one ear was torn. Behind them, a storm of red lines suggested fire, or maybe gunfire. In the next picture, the dog was alone, sitting by a wall. And in the third, a child stood in front of the same wall, hand outstretched. She's waiting for me, Noah explained, when Caroline asked about the drawings. But not just behind the bricks. In all the places she's ever been. She keeps remembering. And when she remembers too much, it hurts. Caroline tried to explain to Tom, but he only shook his head. I don't know what you wanted to say, he said. That I believe our kid is dreaming a dog's memories? That he's connected to her across some emotional, what, frequency? I don't need you to believe it, she said quietly. I just need you to stop dismissing him. Tom sighed. Care, he's 6. And somehow he knows things even I didn't know about my father. Tom didn't respond. That night, Caroline sat with Noah in the basement. He was cross-legged again, a blanket draped over his shoulders, speaking quietly to the wall. She says Grandpa used to sing to her, he said without looking back. Not a real song, just a hum. And sometimes when he was too sad to talk, he'd lie on the floor and she'd put her head on his chest. Caroline blinked, eyes burning. He looked up at her. Did you know that? She shook her head. No, but I believe it. Noah smiled faintly and leaned against her shoulder. She's afraid she'll forget him if nobody comes. That's why she keeps calling. Caroline didn't speak. She reached out and placed her hand on the wall. And somewhere, beyond brick and wood and time, something stirred. A shape pressed faintly back from the other side. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with recognition. Later that week, Caroline opened her father's service records again and found something she hadn't noticed the first time. A field note scribbled in fading pencil, barely legible. If I ever go under, she'll wait. It's what she does. Tom didn't like the way the house had started to feel. It wasn't anything obvious. The furnace still ran, the lights still worked, and the floors didn't creak any more than usual. But there was something underneath it all now. Some quiet weight that settled into the corners like fog that never lifted. More than once, he caught himself pausing at the top of the basement stairs, hand resting on the doorknob without realizing it. He'd shake it off, mumble something under his breath, and turn away. But the pause kept happening. Caroline noticed. She noticed everything these days, especially the way Tom flinched when Noah talked about Clover. He's not hurting anyone, she said one morning as they stood in the kitchen. Tom set down his coffee mug a little harder than necessary. That's not the point. Then what is? The point is he's not letting go. He's 6, Caroline, and he's down there every night talking to a wall. What if it's not healthy? What if we're feeding something in him we shouldn't? Caroline leaned against the counter, arms folded. What if we're not feeding him enough? Tom turned toward her. You're saying I'm the problem now? I'm saying you never even tried to listen. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm trying, okay? But you have to admit this is getting strange. Caroline said nothing. She didn't need to. The air between them was already full of the things they hadn't said. That afternoon, she invited Dr. Harper over for tea. The vet arrived in jeans and a wool coat, snow clinging to her boots. She looked tired, but not unkind. They sat at the kitchen table, while Noah napped upstairs. I'm not here to test your son, Dr. Harper said, warming her hands on a mug. I just want to understand what's happening. Caroline nodded. So do I? Harper reached into her satchel and pulled out a folder. Inside were scanned copies of Edward's service records, the same ones Caroline had found in the attic. But these had red stamps across the corners. Confidential, K-9 PTSD support unit. She placed them gently on the table. I called in a few favors, Harper said. This program existed. Briefly, mid-'80s to early '90s. They trained dogs to mirror trauma responses, to help veterans regulate panic attacks before they happen. Caroline blinked. How does that even work? Harper shrugged. Behavioral mirroring. Pattern recognition. Some believe it was instinct. Others thought it bordered on telepathy. Do you? Harper paused. I believe we don't understand half of what animals are capable of. She pointed to a handwritten note at the bottom of one record. Handler notes. Subject, Clover. Demonstrates anticipatory behavior consistent with emotional projection. Maintains eye contact. Responds before verbal command is given. Shows refusal to leave handler in high distress states. Caroline stared at the page. That's exactly what Noah said she does. She's bonding with him, Harper said gently, and he's responding to her the way your father did. Caroline looked away. Tom thinks we've lost our minds. Harper smiled, but it was sad. Science doesn't always move in a straight line. Sometimes what we feel comes before what we can measure. Later that evening, they brought Tom into the conversation. He listened quietly as Harper explained the research, the mirror behaviors, the documentation that backed up Noah's claims. When she was done, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. So what? You're telling me our son is now some kind of animal empath? I'm telling you, Harper replied calmly, that something's happening between him and that dog. Something real. Whether you choose to believe it doesn't change the fact that Clover is alive and waiting. Tom stood. Alive where? Behind a wall? This is insane. Caroline reached into the drawer beside the fridge and pulled out a small handheld tool, a stud finder. She held it out to him. Check the wall, she said. Yourself. Tonight. He didn't take the device right away. But an hour later, after Noah was asleep and the house was quiet, Tom went down to the basement. He stood in front of the wall for a long time before he even moved. Then he turned on the stud finder and slowly ran across the bricks. Beep. Then again. Beep, beep. The spacing was wrong. He frowned, adjusting the angle, scanning again. There was a large section, roughly 6 feet wide, where the readings were irregular, like someone had been built over the original structure. He knocked on the wall. Hollow. His breath caught in his throat. The next morning, he didn't say anything, just handed the stud finder back to Caroline and walked out onto the porch. She followed him, wrapping her sweater tighter around herself. Well, he exhaled. I don't know what's in there, but whatever it is, it's not just brick and insulation. They stood in silence together, watching the trees sway in the morning wind. After a moment, Caroline reached over and took his hand. I think she's still alive, she said. Tom didn't answer, but he didn't let go of her hand, either. And that night, for the first time, he followed Noah down to the basement. The wall came down on a Tuesday. It had rained the night before, and the basement smelled like damp stone and old iron. The air was heavier than usual, filled with the quiet pressure of something unspoken, a tension that hummed in the corners, clung to the stairs, and pressed behind every breath. Tom stood in front of the far wall with a hammer in one hand and a chisel in the other. His face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes focused not on the task itself but on the space just beyond it. Caroline hovered at the edge of the room, arms crossed over her chest. Dr. Harper knelt beside the folding table they had cleared, her vet bag already open, surgical gloves tucked into one pocket. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, his flashlight resting in his lap, eyes wide and still. He didn't speak, but every part of him was alert, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Tom took a breath, lifted the hammer, and brought it down. The first hit echoed like a shout. A flurry of dust rose from the point of impact. Nothing happened. He struck again, and again, then something shifted. A sound, not the dull thud of tool against brick, but something softer, like a gasp caught in a chamber of stone. Tom froze. Noah's eyes lit up. She's there. Tom glanced at him, then back at the wall. I heard it. He kept going. With every blow, the wall gave a little more. Tiny cracks spread outward, and flakes of plaster began to fall like old snow. Behind it, the mortar groaned, not loudly, but enough to feel. After 15 minutes, there was a hole the size of a football. Tom stepped back, chest heaving, sweat gathering at his temples. Dr. Harper stepped forward, crouched, and held her flashlight to the opening. The beam passed through crumbled insulation and splintered wood. A narrow gap emerged, just barely the width of a grown man's shoulders. It wasn't a crawl space. It was more like a pocket, something built deliberately into the wall. A hollow no one had known existed, except for one. Harper leaned in, and there it was, the faintest shimmer of eyeshine. She drew a breath. Oh, my God! What? Caroline asked. She's in there. Noah stood, slowly, flashlight in hand. He walked toward the wall like he was approaching a sleeping animal, careful not to make a sound. He knelt beside the hole, his face inches from the opening. It's okay, he whispered. You don't have to be scared. There was silence, then the softest sound. A whimper. Not loud, not desperate, just tired. Noah's eyes filled with tears. She's still waiting. Dr. Harper moved beside him, peering in again. She's lying down, she said gently, her muzzle's resting on her paws. I can see the edge of the collar. It's got a tag. Tom dropped to his knees. Can we get her out? Not yet. The space is too tight. We have to widen the hole, but we need to be careful. She may be injured. He nodded and picked the hammer back up. This time, he worked slower, more methodical. Each piece of plaster removed with precision. As the opening widened, the smell changed, old fur, stale breath, the faint tang of rusted metal. Not rotten, not decay, but lived in. A scent that didn't belong in any wall. And then came the moment none of them would forget. A nose pushed through. It was dry and cracked, the fur around it caked with dust. But it twitched once, twice, sniffing the new air like someone waking from a coma. Noah didn't move. Clover's muzzle emerged, narrow and grayed with age, her eyes following. Sunken but alert, glimmering with the last flickers of something sacred. Recognition. She saw Noah and wagged her tail. Just once. Barely a twitch. But it was enough. She knows him, Caroline whispered. She knows him. Tom said nothing. His hand clenched around the hammer, then slowly released it. He sat back, stunned. Dr. Harper slipped on her gloves, her voice steady. We'll need to get fluids into her. She's severely dehydrated. I'll check for sores, fractures. God only knows how long she's been like this. But Clover wasn't looking at her. She kept her gaze on Noah. He reached forward, palm up. Hi, he whispered, voice trembling. It's me. Grandpa's not here. But I came. Clover edged forward, inch by inch, until her muzzle rested in his small hand. Her body was too weak to move more than that, but she let out a sound, not a whine, not a bark, a sigh, a release. Harper began prepping the floor as Tom and Caroline worked to clear more space. Caroline's hand shook, but she didn't stop. Tom's jaw was clenched, but tears welled in his eyes. By the time they made the opening wide enough, Clover was fully visible. Her body was emaciated, every rib visible, her fur thinned, her limbs trembling. but she was alive. They wrapped her gently in blankets and laid her on a soft mat. Harper inserted the 4-line. Noah sat beside her, not touching, just close enough for her to know he was there. Caroline looked at Dr. Harper. Will she make it? The vet glanced at Clover, then at Noah, and nodded slowly. She shouldn't be alive, she said. But she is. And that counts for something. The house was silent. Then Clover shifted slightly and rested her head against Noah's leg. He didn't move. He just whispered. You waited. I came. Clover stayed at the veterinary clinic for 11 days. During that time, Dr. Harper said the same sentence more than once. She shouldn't be here, but she is. It became a kind of quiet mantra. They whispered it when she opened her eyes each morning, when she lifted her head to drink water on her own, when she let out a weak bark at the sound of Noah's voice. There was no medical reason she should have survived being walled in for that long. Not in her condition, not at her age. But Clover had done more than survive. She had waited, and now she was healing. Noah visited every day. He sat cross-legged beside her kennel, just as he'd sat beside the wall, whispering stories into the quiet. Sometimes he didn't speak at all. He just laid his hand near hers, letting her feel his presence. Caroline watched this silent ritual unfold and never interrupted. She came to understand that whatever Clover had gone through, whatever Noah had dreamed or felt or known, none of it had passed. It was all still alive, still moving quietly between them, like a river underground. Dr. Harper began calling it a bond beyond behavior. This isn't training, she said one afternoon while adjusting Clover's fur. This is memory, shared memory, emotional imprinting, maybe, or something deeper. Tom had started spending time at the clinic too, though he mostly lingered in the lobby. On the 5th day, he brought a folding chair back to Clover's room and just sat with them. He didn't say much, but when Clover raised her head and licked his hand, his eyes went glassy. He reached into his coat and pulled out Edward's old dog tags, still on their original chain, and placed them gently beside her. She remembers him, he said. I see it in her eyes. Eventually, Dr. Harper allowed them to bring her home. They converted the sunroom into a recovery space. Blankets laid across the floor, a low bed, a fan for airflow. Ivy, a small rescue pup from the same facility Clover had once seen in Noah's dreams, was brought in from the shelter a few days later. She was small, nervous, barely recovered from severe neglect. But the first time she saw Clover, she crawled across the room and curled beside her without hesitation. It was Clover who gave her safety, and Noah who gave her peace. She dreams too, Noah said softly, running his fingers gently behind Ivy's ears. But it's harder for her to forget. Caroline didn't ask how he knew. She didn't need to any more. In the weeks that followed, life returned to something close to normal. But it wasn't the same kind of normal. It was a softer version, a quieter one. Noah started drawing again, this time not walls, but bridges, dogs crossing fields, a boy and 2 shadows walking into a wooded trail. Dr. Harper framed one of his drawings and hung it in her clinic. Beneath it, she placed a small brass plaque. Some things don't need explaining to be understood. On the 1-month anniversary of Clover's rescue, they held a small gathering at the house. Nothing fancy, just family, a few neighbors, and Mr. Franklin, who brought a folded flag and a framed photo of Edward in uniform. They sat around the fire pit in the backyard as twilight settled in. Ivy lay asleep in Caroline's lap. Clover, still slow to rise, rested her head in Noah's lap with one paw tucked beneath her chin. Mr. Franklin cleared his throat and stood. I never talk much about your father, he said, but I will now, because I think he knew this day would come. He held up the photo. Edward stood tall, one hand resting on Clover's back, the other holding his helmet by the strap. They were in a desert somewhere. The background was blurred, but their eyes were sharp. I watched him go through things no man should go through alone. But he wasn't alone. He had her. And now. Mr. Franklin looked at Clover, then at Noah. She has him again. Maybe not the same way. But maybe that's enough. There was a pause. A long one. Then Noah said softly, she never forgot him. And no one questioned it. That night, after everyone had gone home. Caroline sat on the porch with Tom, while Noah curled up in the sunroom beside Clover and Ivy. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Tom asked. Caroline smiled. "I'm not even sure where here is." Tom looked through the window where Noah slept beside the two dogs, his chest rising and falling peacefully. "I think it's right where we're supposed to be." They didn't say anything after that. Just listened to the night settle around them. Peaceful. Still. Later, in the quiet dark, Noah stirred. Clover was awake beside him. Her eyes were open, but she didn't move. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to remember everything anymore," he whispered. "I'll remember for you." Clover blinked slowly, then laid her head back down. In the days to come, she grew stronger. Ivy began following her everywhere, imitating her movements, shadowing her like a small echo. Caroline once said they looked like two souls from the same book, just different chapters. Eventually, Dr. Harper began training Ivy with Noah's help. She believed the little dog had potential as a therapy animal, especially for veterans. "She's quiet," Harper said, "but attentive, watchful. Like Clover," Caroline said. Harper smiled. "Or maybe like Noah." On the first spring morning after the snow thawed, the three of them, boy, dog, and puppy, walked to the edge of the woods behind the house. Clover moved slowly, her gait still stiff, but steady. They stopped at the clearing where an old bench overlooked the stream. Noah sat down, Clover by his side, Ivy curled up at his feet. For a long while, they watched the water move. No one spoke, but everything that needed to be said had already been shared. And in that stillness, with sunlight touching the tips of Clover's fur and wind tugging gently at the hem of Noah's jacket, something old and wounded finally found rest. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, please let us know in the comments. Every word you share is a thread that connects us. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to Shepherd Tales. Reaching 1,000 subscribers isn't just a milestone for us. It's a quiet encouragement, a sign that these stories still matter in a world that moves too fast. As the old saying goes, those who remember the forgotten bring light to where shadows once lived. Whether you're here for the healing, the hope, or simply the hush between two heartbeats, thank you. Watch till the very end, because somewhere in this story lives a truth waiting for you. Until next time, keep listening. Some hearts still whisper through the walls.